However, on the other hand, the church is finding itself wrestling with the distractions of bad PR, the negative behavior of some who claim to be ambassadors of Jesus Christ. Too many of us have exchanged the gospel and kingdom principles with the religion of political ideology. In doing so, we have cast aside the teaching of Jesus and taken up the manual of our particular political persuasion, becoming converts to their social agendas. Both sides of the political spectrum revere ungodly men and women as leaders of religious dignity, though vile in character, belief, and behavior. The church's fear and silence to speak boldly against the moral issues of injustice, malicious, abusive behavior of religious leaders, and legal and political mendacity of our governmental leaders have disqualified in the hearts of some the Christian's right to speak against those things that we have labeled moral issues. And please understand that what the church has traditionally called moral issues are a small few of what Jesus addressed as moral issues. In fact, I hate to agree with a well-known pastor's assessment of the more conservative branch of the Christian faith. He said that we, and I know some of you don't think this, but we are evangelicals. The evangelical community, you got to look up the definition of what it means to be evangelical. But we, the evangelical community, spend more time addressing the things that Jesus spent little time talking about. And we have little to say on what Jesus spent a lot of time talking about. Because many evangelicals and Pentecostal, charismatic, conservative congregations have not been balanced in teaching and preaching all of morality. The distraction has become louder than the message of hope. So as the Church of Jesus Christ wrestles with this between place, we are attempting to maneuver away from the distractions and negative attention, while at the same time being relevant and resourceful to the world that God has commanded us to reach. Sometimes fighting against the negative perception of the church and endeavoring to live out the message of the gospel can exhaust even the strongest believer. Sometimes we find ourselves wrapped in discouragement as we strive to do good in the presence of evil. In this hour, we find that we are not just fighting against the world, but sometimes we are fighting against perverse theology that has crept in among the family of believers. The attempt to redefine righteousness is coming from within the house and without, holding on to biblical standards of holiness and living out God's command as is stated in Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 7 and 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 16. Be ye holy, for I am holy, has become an offense to some church attendees as well as our society. The enemy has capitalized on the hateful rhetoric, the lack of compassion for the disenfranchised, abuse of power, racism and sexism, and hypocritical behavior that seems to be common in some of our religious organizations. The enemy is trying to use the stain of human behavior as a tool to weaken the testimony and the authority of the body of Christ. Sadly, there are even a few within the Christian faith community who have joined in on the propaganda of the enemy to try and call into question the determination of the churches, the Christian churches, stand to be firm on the righteous truth of the gospel. In spite of this, God has required that his chosen people, who have been set apart as a royal priesthood and holy nation, a people meant as a possession only for him, that we remain faithful to his commands and precepts, even in the midst of an unrighteous generation. Because God has called us out, we must understand that we are going to face oppression and opposition. As opposition comes against us, we must be committed and depend on the wisdom and grace of God to walk in love and mercy while standing firm on our convictions. We can rest assured that the Christian faith is going to be challenged, and not just by the unbeliever, but also by those who once embraced the faith, even those who still claim to call on the name of the Lord.